Hi there, welcome everyone to today's webinar. I can see you all joining, so prompt as always. We will give everyone maybe a minute or so before we kick off. For those who are joining, there's a QR code in the bottom or left of the screen there. If you scan that, that will take you to the Slido link that we'll be using today throughout the session. We've got some polls, and this can be where you put all of your comments and questions as we go through. Just put the link as well in case anyone would like to dial in via their browser. Okay, great. I can see we've got a good group of people, so welcome everyone. I think we'll kick off. Yeah, so hi everyone. Delighted to be joining you today to talk about all things diversity and inclusion data. LGBT Great and Workable in partnership for today's session. For those joining, please scan the QR code there, and that will give you access to the Slido that we're going to use for today. My name is Alex Hoare. I'm the Executive Director and Head of Advisory here at LGBT Great, and I'll be sort of talking to you today a little bit around some of the data that we've seen as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion data, bit of a mouthful, and then sharing with you some of the recommendations, best practices, thoughts, reflections that we've kind of collated throughout a range of conversations with our clients, members, partners over the last few months. And one of those is with us today. Hey, Avi, how you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you very much. Maybe a quick intro from you for the folks joining.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm Abi Alarawaju. So I'm the Enterprise Account Manager at Workable. So my role is primarily to implement and then generally just look after what we consider to be our enterprise clients during their time with Workable.
Fabulous. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about what Workable and LGBT Great have been doing together in a moment. I think there'll be quite a few people joining today who know LGBT Great, and I'm sure many know Workable as well. But we'll do a quick overview of the two organisations before we dive into some of the insights we'd like to share with you today. So for those that are not familiar with us, we are LGBT Great. We are I say small but perfectly formed consulting firm and membership organization supporting financial services and professional services firms to improve their LGBTQ plus diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of holistically across the board. So whether that's through training and insights and thought leadership, through to benchmarking, you'll see a bit of that later, through kind of transformation programs and advisory consulting bits of work, and what we'll talk about today a little bit, LGBT Great Careers, which is our new talent attraction program. We've got Claire and Lauren on the line. You'll hear a little bit from Claire, our COO and head of LGBT Great Careers later, but they are the masterminds behind this endeavor, which we have launched in partnership with Workable. So LGBT Great and Workable together, a wonderful partnership. We've been very excited to work with you. This has been a big deal for us. And, you know, for those that know us, the Ocean Partnership brand and the LGBT Great brand kind of, sit together. Ocean is a, financial and professional services recruitment firm. Lots of experience. Claire's posted many people, some of you may be on the call today, across the industry over the years, and LGBT Great now works with nearly 60 organizations. That number has crept up a little bit, and we have a large group of people that we work with to empower them to be seen, to be visible, and to be supported in all things LGBTQ plus DE and I. And I'll pause there. Abby, over to you for a little bit of an overview of Workable.
Perfect. So Workable is an ATS, so an applicant tracking system. So our primary focus is to basically enable organizations to be able to firstly attract talent, but then comfortably and efficiently manage them through that cycle. So that can be anything from just getting them into the process or having multiple pipelines to make sure that you're handling them in the correct way. And obviously there's a number of things that go on within that, sort of around making offers, templates, sending emails, all that kind of fun stuff you'd usually do. but you can kind of see some of the numbers on the screen now. We look after roughly around 27,000 organizations. We have a number of job boards, different sites, sourcing sites that we integrate with. So yeah, it's a bit of an all-in-one solution for tracking all of your applicants.
Amazing. And with that expertise and the platform and the tech that you have, we've joined forces on LGBT Great Careers, which, has been a bit of a game changer for us. And LGBT Great Careers is a new job board platform and talent interaction kind of enhancer specifically for financial professional services organizations who are looking to better reach LGBTQ plus talent and allies. Historically, we see that LGBTQ plus people typically underrepresented across financial services. There's a load of data out there that will tell you about that in more detail. But LGBT Great Careers, the mission and vision really underpinning it is to build that world-class talent pool for professional and financial services organizations. But then also to empower talent, that may be underrepresented in those spaces to feel that these are organizations, correctly feel that these are organizations that will support them, empower them, and will include them. So LGBT Great Careers has, some checks that we do, some due diligence to ensure that those organizations are, actively engaged in improving, outcomes and the inclusive environment for talent. The LGBT Great Careers also helps us at LGBT Great to deliver on our own social sustainability agenda. And I'm delighted to confirm and sort of announce to you, and it's been a recent update, that LGBT Great Careers provides free access to the platform for LGBTQ plus charities and humanitarian organizations around the world. So if you are part of one of those types of organizations, or if you know someone who is, get in contact with us, because we'll be able to provide them with free job postings to try and help improve the reach that those organizations kind of doing the good work can have. Claire on the line, our COO, will tell you a little bit more about what you can expect next from LGBT Great Careers towards the end of today's session. Okay. So that's a bit of context. So that's what brings us here today, is this conversation around data. We shared a little bit with what kind of the work we do and why we're kind of able to talk about this. But there's quite a lot of things that we can speak to when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion data. Some of you on the call today may be sitting there thinking, oh, well, not another conversation around capturing my data, what they're going to do with it, why do I bother, what's the point, all of that kind of thing. And those are all very legitimate, questions and concerns that people have. This is not an easy conversation, around giving your self-ID data to your organization. What organizations then do with it is sometimes, not clear, etc., etc. And so what we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about that, about those dynamics, the comfort levels that people have, and then to share with you a few of the thoughts and recommendations from the conversations we've been having around how can organizations improve the disclosure rates of around self-ID data across all diversity, equity, and inclusion dimensions. So race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexuality, disability, neurodiversity, etc. And what does it mean to actually improve that, and why should we bother? That's what we're going to touch on later. For those who have joined since I put up the opening slide, I can see there's quite a few more of you. We are going to be running a series of polls throughout today's session. And the reason for this is that we like to try and keep these sessions dynamic and engaging as much as we can. Otherwise, it's just you sat there listening to me for an hour. Which you may like, but many people would rather have a little bit of a break. So we are running a couple of Slido polls, and I'd like to run the first of those with you now. Hopefully this will give a kind of grounding to some of the conversation and to capture your thoughts on this topic. So we thought we would start with a kind of the basic, the big question. Please do scan the QR code on the screen now, or join. Or I can see people are already in. That's good. So the question is, generally, how comfortable are you disclosing data about your identity to your employer? Not comfortable to very comfortable. Abby, I feel like you and I have to say that we're very comfortable.
Super comfortable.
Yeah, super comfortable. Um, I mean, hey, that's pretty good actually. People are very comfortable. Um, oh, a couple of people at the two, so there's a couple of concerns. I can see there's more people joining. Um, someone's just put one, so that's okay. So there's someone there that has concerns. That's interesting. Um, we've just had a comment come through. Wow, that doesn't reflect the data sharing rates we have. Interesting. So maybe there's a kind of very comfortable, but I'm frustrated that they don't use it. Non-binary staff are not counted. Oh, thanks, Alex, for sharing that. Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll talk a little bit around inclusion later. Interesting that there's so many of you saying you're comfortable. Maybe it's a bit of a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that you've joined this session on diversity, equity, inclusion data, and therefore you are more likely. So where there's some bias in the sample. But anyway, this is an interesting start point. So you're all really comfortable with this question around data, but there are quite a few instances we've seen where people are not so comfortable. Alex, you've shared one example where you're less comfortable. And this is something that we try and support organizations to overcome, to either engage the audience properly and the population that is really comfortable, but may actually not really know why, or how to do it. Sometimes it's a systems issue, but also engaging people who, there's a couple of people who said one and two there, who are not comfortable. Or if you're at the fore, you may be somewhat comfortable, but there could be more that your organization could do here to make you feel that you're giving that data for a reason, and that reason is valid. Okay, thank you everyone. So the technology works, so that's reassuring. There'll be a few more polls later, so keep your phones with you. For anyone who wanted to post a question, you can do so either in the chat function within Zoom, the Q&A box within Zoom, or through the Slido link that you've been using there to submit. So please, you feel free to use any of those if you have questions. And interesting that you were all very comfortable. We run a LGBTQ plus diversity, equity, and inclusion benchmark across the industry, and we have seen real heterogeneity, real difference in data disclosure and capture approaches and disclosure rates across the industry. I'm just sharing here, anyone who's heard me talk about the IBIT before knows that they'll have seen this slide before, but this just outlines the 10 indicators that we assess that benchmark against. But the box on whisker plots on the right-hand side are the purple and green boxes are where we talk about or capture data around diversity, equity, inclusion data, approaches to talent acquisition data. And what you can see from this box, particularly that purple one, which is where we look at capture approaches and disclosure rates, that's pretty big. And that basically shows that there's a huge variation in the reporting. The scores that come through from the IBIT benchmark that we run are really varied, indicating that there's no real, at least from what we're seeing, standard approach here, standard disclosure rate, and that's not just, but just in the context of LGBTQ plus data. So kind of more broadly, this conversation remains, I think, important, given that no firm has really cracked it, but some firms are certainly well on the way. Abby, anything from you just on that data around kind of what you're seeing on the ground at Workable?
I mean, it's quite similar to what you'd kind of expect. There's going to be some companies that have not necessarily cracked it, but they are doing everything they can to try and crack it. So
Yeah.
giving ample opportunity to be able to have the conversation, to be able to get information off people that they feel they need to get off. So yeah, I'd say it's quite similar. Obviously, Workable primarily deal with applicants. So that kind of getting to see what it's like for employees is quite interesting because that's kind of an area that we're moving into as well. But yeah, I'd say it's kind of bang on what we'd kind of expect to see as well.
Oh, that's good. I've got the Abbey seal of approval on that data set, so I'm very pleased about that. Yeah, no, really interesting that you're moving into talking about employees as well as talent. That's really interesting. We've got some data around talent in a minute, and I'll be keen to get your eagle eye on that. But for those on the call, we've got another poll for you. So thank you for being engaged. That was LGBTQ plus data. But now I'd like to know, what data do you feel comfortable disclosing to your employer if you knew that it would be safely stored and anonymously reported on? So, let's assume that it's being kept in the kind of right way. Lots of people saying everything, so that's great. I mean, this group is super engaged, so I think we all need to make you champions of, ambassadors. That's the new buzzword, isn't it? Kind of data ambassadors. I think you will have to become data ambassadors now internally. Um, Gender identity, at the bottom, what have we got? Kind of, okay, 6% of you saying none of the above. So there is a portion, of you that are saying, I actually don't want my data to be disclosed, even if it is safely stored. Socioeconomic data, 3/4 of you, that's something that we're increasingly seeing is around, social mobility and economic background. We've had a question: are age and gender, well, sex at birth, not mandatory? They can be. In certain HR systems, they are mandatory. Whether or not they are kind of actively captured as part of the kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion space, particularly around gender identity, which is distinct from biological sex as well. So I think, yes and no is kind of the complex answer to that question. Whether or not do firms actually then report on age? Do we actually look at age distribution across the employee base? I don't think I've seen many diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of impact reports that have looked into age either. Given that it's kind of a mandated one, everyone's got, date of birth and things. Is that something that we actually should be asking then again? Do you mind if we then use age to look at how our, age-friendly aspects are, you know, not always considered. Gender identity still topping. Gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, kind of age, all being there together. And then at the bottom, kind of 8% of you saying none of the above, and some of the lower ones. So, okay, a pretty good distribution, I think. And I think pretty standard kind of distribution there, given that gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, in some instances are regulated mandates from regulators to around disclosure. Good, thank you, everyone. We did a study in earlier this year, looking at role models across 5 countries, LGBTQ plus role models and the impact that they have. And we explored this question of data capture and data disclosure across those role models to get a sense of kind of how can role models be then a ambassador for data in that sense. We asked which of the categories of demographic data have you disclosed to your organization, not would you be comfortable, but have you disclosed? And we saw an interesting phenomenon that LGBTQ plus people were more likely against every single category to have submitted their data. We've had some interesting conversations. I think Shreyas in my team is on the line, but Shrey and I worked on this report together. And our hypothesis was that given that kind of LGBTQ plus people's identity is, in some instances, kind of very front of mind, you may have to you have to come out at work, you have to hide parts of yourself in certain instances if you don't feel safe. You may be more kind of attuned to thinking about, your identity and how it impacts you at work and how people perceive you. So there could be a correlation there between that heightened sense of one's own identity and then a willingness to disclose. Question mark, up for debate. Let me know what you think. Interestingly, there was still sort of 7% of people saying that their company did not allow them to submit their data. So there's still a systems issue. And then I've not submitted my data yet, but I would in the future. We saw a kind of interesting sort of 10 to sort of 16% disclosure rate. So there is a little bit of a willingness there as well. Abby, any thoughts?
Not really. I find it quite interesting about the not being able to submit my data.
Yeah.
As you said, it's kind of probably more of a systems thing. So it'd be interesting to see is there just not a system available?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just not maybe a question they want to, or maybe not even a question, maybe is it not a topic they're ready to tackle? But yeah, that one is probably the most interesting from what I
Mm,
can see on here.
I'm sure there are some like systems integrators out there who
Mm.
would want to tackle that 7%. I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly, exactly.
Okay, cool. Third poll for everyone. How confident are you that your employer is collecting data about your identity with a view to genuinely creating better outcomes for underrepresented groups? We talked about, oh, there we go, straight
Oh,
in with a
sorry.
one, straight in with a one. That's exactly what
Okay.
I thought. That's funny. Okay, so we've talked about comfort levels around submitting. We talked about what you would submit. We've looked a little bit around what we've seen. But the question, the crux, the difficult question is often, why do I submit this? Is my company actually going to do anything with this? Are they going to, do they have a nefarious alter, or purpose here? And I think this is quite interesting to see that, 33% of you, I think that's pretty good actually, thinking that, your companies, you're very confident that they're genuinely creating better outcomes. But I think those numbers in the one, two, and three, I think are pretty reflective of what we've seen historically in conversations. And I know I felt it, in some organizations, not LGBT great, that I've worked at in the past, that I didn't really know what they were doing. I didn't really know why they were capturing it. It didn't feel like giving that data would have any impact positively on me or, someone in my community. So that's very funny. Avi, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, no, this I didn't expect it to be this like perfect arc.
I know.
But it is actually a perfect arc. So that is quite interesting to see. And I think it makes sense as well
Mm,
because, and I think we'll probably go through it a little bit later, but so it's one thing asking for it, but it's a second thing to make the person you're asking very clear, this is my
mm.
intention with this information. So yeah, seeing this arc is very interesting to see.
That's funny. You've all been well prepped for these polls, clearly. Okay, cool. We mentioned talent earlier. I'd just like to focus in a little bit on talent, and around comfort levels as well for talent. We have a new piece of research forthcoming, so it's a bit of a sneak preview for you all. Looking into talent, LGBTQ plus talent attraction and retention. And credit to Shreyas on my team for putting this together. We asked a question: at what point in the application process would you feel comfortable disclosing data about the following to an organization? I haven't split it out by LGBTQ plus, non-LGBTQ plus. I've just done the aggregate figures here. We had over 1,800 responses to this across 7 countries, so we're pretty confident that this is a good reflection of at least what people are thinking at the moment. I would not feel comfortable disclosing this data at any stage in the application process. A third of people around gender identity, and 20% of people around sexual orientation. Pretty interesting. I think that paints quite a picture on the different comfort levels around gender identity and sexual orientation as data that we share with organizations. In terms of then when people submit, 28% sexual orientation in the CV or in a cover letter. That's quite interesting. So we're LGBT great. So, quite often we do see in cover letters and not necessarily in CVs as much, but certainly in cover letters, people share with us lots of personal information around, I'm part of the community. This is a cause that really speaks to me. So there are certain instances, I think, in a cover letter where actually, front loading that parts of your identity are relevant to an organization or that will inform how you move through the world, actually feels like something talent wants to do. After that, then kind of we enter the systems aspect. That light green is around the initial application, and then the gray towards kind of screening and employment offer. um, Abby, what are your thoughts on that from a kind of pipeline perspective?
This all adds up quite well.
Mm,
I think that red sort of I would not feel comfortable at all in
yeah,
gender identity and sexual orientation makes complete sense because more often than not, if you're not giving the applicant, sorry, an understanding of why you want it,
yeah.
the applicant's easy assumption, which I would agree with as well, is you could potentially use this against me.
Mm,
Particularly, it's not on this at the moment, but disability is a really big one.
yeah.
Often people don't want to share that because they're like, well, if I share that, this might mean I don't get the job. Um, It's very interesting to see the way it starts to change as you go through the process. Cover letters and application forms, and I think somebody in the chat just mentioned it, Charlotte, around putting pronouns on CVs.
Mm,
That's something that a lot of my clients now have opted to do as well,
nice.
from a standpoint of obviously understanding, but from a very big thing of actually just referring to the person the way they want to be referred to when you ultimately come to speak to them is a massive focus around that.
Mm,
And then yeah, during pre-employment and screening, it makes sense that more people would be open at that point because you're a little bit more into the process. You feel less and less like it's going to be a bad impact on you.
yeah.
So yeah, I think it kind of all adds up quite nicely.
Mm.
It
I
would be
think.
interesting to understand the red though, the 33% that
Mhm.
didn't want to. It would be really interesting to see what are the reasons why. Is it just that you
Mm.
don't know where it's going, or you just flat out don't want to share it?
Uh, yeah, yeah, no, completely agree. Yeah, I think there's a lot of dynamics, and we're going to touch on those kind of hesitation factors in a
Yeah,
moment. We've had a comment come through. Assume these numbers are cumulative, e.g., if someone is willing to disclose in an application, they would intuitively also be comfortable disclosing. Yes, that was how the question was worded. So you could select all the points at which you'd be comfortable, and then it was aggregate. So we can actually break this down much further as well into seeing if you said X, you would be comfortable at this point. Were you also comfortable at another point? And that's the kind of analysis that we'll be doing in the report. So we're going to look at in isolation these parts of the pipeline, and what the dynamics are there. And if those, if you are comfortable at job interview, would you then be comfortable? Exactly. So thanks David for that comment. That is something that's on our mind as well. So this is just a high level picture, but the intention is to drill down into each of these sections and to try and understand what the dynamics are at play, in the thinking process of talent at these different stages, and how then organizations can effectively, I suppose, engender better trust, between talent and, considering the organization and the organization kind of the comms strategy in engaging that talent. So there's a bilateral engagement, that we have to try and navigate, as organizations, hiring. Um, but yeah, I mean, Abby, to your point, I think this is my next poll.
yeah.
So let's look at some of those hesitation factors. So you've all been pretty good, at saying that you'd be comfortable, but which of the following concerns, if any, do you have about your employer's DEI data collection efforts? Let's just think kind of higher level. This isn't going to be linked to your name or your employer, so don't worry. We're not going to go calling and go ratting on you. Um, but let's see. Skeptical, concerned around being, yeah, not clear why. None, no concerns. I don't trust. So security. The top one is around skepticism. None of the above. Okay. So you're all doubling down on the fact that you're super comfortable on this data conversation. So I need to check who's actually on the call. Um, but no, that's oops, I should go back. Sorry. Um, but yeah, I'll just give everyone another 5 or 10 seconds on this poll. In your conversations with your clients, Abby, what are they talking about kind of DE&I data of candidates a lot at the moment? Is that kind of top of mind for them?
Yeah, I think particularly last year it was a very
Mm.
big thing, and it's kind of rolled into this year. And funnily enough, actually, based on what's on the screen, one of the biggest, I'd say, fears from a company that's trying is that last option. The options available are not inclusive slash do not
Mm,
represent me. It's one of those ones that there's nothing worse than actually not including the answer somebody wants to give. It's just
right.
as bad as, being against it if as you were. So a lot of people are now doing research into what are the types of options I should be putting.
Mm,
Should I be putting options or should I be making them open questions so that they can put
mm,
what they'd like? But then obviously when you're looking at things like reporting, having a limited amount of options makes reporting easier,
yeah.
but you might miss out on the right option for someone. So it's a bit of a balancing act. And I think the more it gets discussed and more of my clients now will have conversations amongst themselves and sort of
Mm,
say, right, this option you put there, we'd never put that before. How come you put it in there? And I think just a bit more education makes people think, okay, we've got more options, we've got more options. And I think as an applicant as well, if you see every time you come back, there's more options, you can kind of say, actually, the data is being used to actually do something here. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that the options available and not inclusive slash do not represent me is one that's in
Mm,
there as well.
yeah, no, interesting that your your clients are speaking amongst themselves as well to try and understand what others are doing.
Yeah,
That's I think something that we feel very cognizant of. Working with I suppose upwards of nearly 60 organizations. We're trying to bring them together as the kind
yeah,
of platform for those conversations around effective best practice, sharing, those sorts of things.
yeah,
But it's I think that's a good sign that the industry is tackling this together rather than it being like, well, you're on your own because
yeah,
if we do it well, we'll get better candidates, and from a competition perspective, I think the inclusive options aspect is a really important one. An easy way for organizations to tackle this, as you say, that does make the reporting a bit challenging sometimes, is just to use the phrase prefer to self-describe and then an open
yeah,
text box. Um, any conversation I can, I try to encourage clients not to say other,
yeah.
as that's the worst when you have to
Yeah, it
click
feels like
other.
pushing into
It's
the
literally othering.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, so prefer to self-describe is kind of the language that we like to see used.
yeah,
And then as you say, reporting does impact that.
yeah. We tend
Um,
to say if the option is not available,
yeah.
would you like to include it below? That's what most of my
Oh, that's
clients would
nice
say.
as
Yeah,
well. Yeah. No, that's good as well. But yeah, I think we'll see a shift away from other or
yeah.
NA or NA. I never
NA,
see it. I don't like that either. Um, okay, cool. From our research, forthcoming research, we asked a few of these types of questions as well. I just wanted to share some of those sorts of thoughts with you. We asked, for which of the following reasons might you consider not disclosing your data to a potential employer? Going back to the talent lens just quickly, um, and exactly as you said, and I think we felt from those conversations that there'll be potential discrimination, against them, prejudice and stigma influencing decision making. The data might be used to make decision about me. It'd be unclear what the company would do. That was reflected in some of the data we saw in that last poll. 20% saying I have no concerns at all. I think that was kind of reflected in the poll that we saw as well. People saying none of the above. And then there were a few other ones as well around systems, and 24% saying that the organization does not have inclusive policies and practices, which is impacting their kind of feeling of confidence around disclosing that data. Um, good. Okay. So I mean, in summary of the first half of today's session, what have we seen? We've seen that this is a particularly engaged group and has a very good and high comfort level in terms of data, which is really reassuring. But there are still some aspects around inclusive options, around how the data is used, what's actually reported, and I can see Charlotte. You've put in around identifiability and anonymity here, which I think is a big concern, particularly in small organizations or in small teams. Typically we'll talk about the thresholds later for reporting, but this is something you see in your voice surveys and employee engagement surveys all the time. If a team has fewer than X number of people, we don't drill down because we don't want those individuals to be identified. So some of those concerns, I think, even if the systems are really strong, even if the senior leadership are super bought in, and even if the kind of reporting around that data capture is really clear, are still areas that need to be kind of tackled proactively by an organization. Keep your comments coming through. It's great to see everyone sharing their thoughts in that chat function. I've put together 7 thoughts, really, and Abby's helped me with it, some of the context from what Workable's been doing, on how organizations might be able to improve these disclosure rates. And many of the things that you've all said so far have been captured in here. So it will be a bit of a summary here, but hopefully it will give you some thoughts if you are a senior leader or if you are one of those data ambassadors, around potential avenues for improving trust and this sense of inclusion across an organization, which I think is really at the crux of this conversation around data. Yeah, I think we sort of said it already, really. At its very core, disclosure rates, I think you could probably say, correlate with how inclusive and trusting or trusted you feel in an organization. The culture, I think we don't talk around the culture around disclosure enough. I think it's one thing to talk about. Yes, we need to disclose. Yes, we're doing it to help the business, but are you building this culture of inclusive disclosure? Why are we talking about it openly? DE&I efforts, when they're done, not tokenistically, but with a real sense of impact, data can be a powerful tool in communicating that internally and externally. I think it's very important to create a space, a dedicated space, consciously, for employees to raise the concerns they have around that data. That can be in a town hall, that could be a one-to-one, it could be an anonymous feedback loop, whatever. But actually proactively telling your employee base that there is you can raise all these concerns and we will tackle them. To preempt that, you could put some guidance documents out that really show how it's used, who has access to it, what the controls are for limiting access. Obviously, everything needs to be subject to GDPR, and if you are operating in a jurisdiction where GDPR is not required, having equal controls is one way of trying to communicate that is the case. Clear and comprehensive guidance on how and why the data is being captured, I think, is something that we've talked about a little bit. We found in our forthcoming research that 3 in 5 LGBTQ plus people reported being more comfortable sharing their diversity data with an organization that had been assessed for LGBTQ plus inclusion. So, building a culture of inclusion generally actually could have a positive impact on comfort around data disclosure. Talk about your EDI programs, use the networks to open those conversations around what the data is being used for. If you're running let's say a race ethnicity pay gap report, then there's probably a correlation with improved disclosure rates around race and ethnicity, because people would like to share that data. We've had a just comment come through that's quite interesting here around the word data disclosure. Using softer language, sharing personal information. That's actually a really good point. Words like declaration and disclosure didn't help the trust culture. Yeah, that's actually a really great point. So yeah, the language you use around that, I think I completely agree with the person that shared that, actually. So I might change my slides in the future. I'm conditioned to talk about disclosure because we talk with leaders and organizations, but sometimes we are ourselves guilty of having that organizational focus. Okay, so that's point number 1. Abby, any thoughts from you on kind of the culture around disclosure?
I think we're probably going to get into it in
Yeah.
another of the couple of slides, but I think when you talk about the culture, obviously it's a bit different for me personally, because I'm talking about a system. So if I'm talking about the culture of a system, I'm thinking, don't just ask for it at the beginning, don't just ask for it at the end, is develop a culture where there's different touch points where you can ask the question, you can gather the data, so that obviously back to the screen that we were on before, where people said different times they feel comfortable disclosing different bits of information. Having a culture throughout your technology, throughout your system, that allows you to keep doing that means that when that person is ready to, it means you're in a good place to be able to gather the information.
That's a really good point. Like the alignment of
Yeah,
like culture with technology.
yeah,
That point around the touch, when you're ready to do it, to actually make sure that there is front and center, right? The reminders
exactly.
around you can do it here.
Yeah, you're available to do it here. It's still managed in the same way. And I think as well, just it kind of shows, and this might just be me being happy and thinking everything's really good in the world. But if somebody said to me as a candidate, right, we've asked you it at this first point, we've asked you it again, we've asked you it again.
Mm,
Okay, maybe you're actually interested in this, and there's a reason, there's a good reason behind why you want this. It's not just, do you know what, we've asked once, we've ticked the box of DEI, and we're done now.
yeah,
Sort of
absolutely.
following through with it shows a little bit more commitment, I think.
Yeah, following through, and then those constant reminders of how it's being
Yeah,
used, why it's being used, and how it's kind of protecting.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Okay, and good. On that note, we've got another poll for you, just to kind of keep you on your toes. And this is kind of around if your employer could genuinely demonstrate the reasons why data is being collected and how it's used positively to impact decision making, would you be more or less likely to submit data about your identity? So, if that culture piece works, would that actually, change the likelihood of you wanting to submit your data? I know this group is quite well positively disposed to that. What do you think, Abby? Would you be more likely?
I definitely would be for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I knew where it was going, I definitely would be more likely to.
um, I mean, is this a leading question? Yes. Are you all saying exactly what I wanted you to say? Yes. But I think it's encouraging to see that I think if this workaround culture lands well, I think it will have that impact that organizations looking to improve the rates of people sharing their personal information. I think was the recommendation for how you phrase that. Um, Improves. Cool. Let's not labor that point. Moving on. Um, One thing that we experience quite a lot, and I mean, Abby, as the enterprise, you must see this all the time, is big organizations, lots of jurisdictions, lots of regions, different offices around the world, all trying to do the same thing, trying to sing from the same, hymn sheet, but then having different, challenges, given that they're present in, different jurisdictions. And I think this is what we're seeing is that this idea of like a global standard but local implementation is really important. So you've got your DE&I strategy globally with standardized metrics, etc. But then actually thinking about those champions and ambassadors locally or regionally or country leads, etc., who can then make sure that that is relevant and appropriate for the jurisdiction. France, for example, Germany, Saudi Arabia all have very different reporting requirements, approaches for capture relative to the UK, for example. So you can still do it in all of those places, but you just have to jump through additional hoops, etc., etc. This is where company networks and groups are really powerful tools in trying to improve the dissemination of that strategy across the different kind of networks or geographies. And one thing that I think it's important to acknowledge probably here is around even just reporting on the participation rate for that data is really important. So if you're in a jurisdiction where data capture is hard, even just reporting on the participation rate can be a barometer for kind of where it is as an organization, or that local organization is relative to the global. Okay, let's focus in a little bit around that legal and regulatory complexities in a bit more detail. And Abby, I appreciate I've been talking quite a lot throughout this, but I know that this was a topic that you and I had a conversation around what Workable is doing to enable this. What are your thoughts? How is that working?
So if I just kind of explain what people are seeing on the screen at the moment. So Workable has got something called candidate surveys. So these are surveys that will be sent post application. But when I say post application, I literally mean like a minute after you've applied, in that you'll be able to put in your application. Once that's been submitted, it will then pop up with a candidate survey. So these candidate surveys, as you can see, what we've got here is I've highlighted United Kingdom because that is who I want this survey to go to. As you say, I've got a lot of enterprise clients that can operate in a number of different markets. I think one of my largest clients has about 18, 19 different
Oh wow.
offices around the world. So what they've actually done is they've looked at what legally are we allowed to ask, what are we not allowed to ask, And
Mm,
then having this little feature here basically just allows them to say, right, we've created 19 different surveys. We know all of those are in line with legal, regulatory sort of um, rules, that kind of thing. So it just basically means that there's a bit more comfort when it comes to sending those out. It means that somebody's not going to come back and say, actually, I am certain you're not allowed to ask this sort of question to somebody in this country. So it means that they can kind of stay on top of it with this feature that you see at the moment.
mm,
For slightly smaller companies, you'll also see that if I was to have taken out that United Kingdom, it would mean that survey will go to absolutely everyone. So for some smaller companies where they don't have that concern of, oh, we've got a bunch of different offices, we've got people applying from all around the world, it means they can create a sort of one size fits all in terms of a survey and just shoot that out. And then obviously when it comes to things like reporting, they've just got one singular view that they're looking at. Whereas some of the larger ones need to have a little bit of a think of, we've got different questions that we're allowed to ask, but instead of looking at the metrics just as metrics, what we're going to look at instead is themes, just because we can't look at them as sort of oranges and oranges, apples and apples, because they're not the same kind of questions. So that is kind of where this allows for. Um, I think with regard to sort of GDPR, we're kind of lucky because the way this candidate survey works, and this kind of goes back to a few other questions that we had previously, is our candidate surveys are all anonymous. So if even if you're an admin on Workable, you still won't be able to. Even myself as an account manager that can sort of see our back end systems, even I can't go and say, right, it was this candidate that answered this response. So I think in terms of GDPR, we don't need to worry about it that much because it's not actually linked to a candidate specifically. But also, obviously, it just gives a little bit more comfort in that we are very clear that this is anonymous and it's not going to be used to sort of kind of encourage us to go either way when it comes to your application.
mm. No, that I mean that's reassuring, isn't it? That
Yeah,
even you, the supreme,
the supreme ruler of
yeah,
all of it.
exactly. You
Yeah.
got all the data, but yeah, that I mean, is that something that you kind of like, you kind of tell applicants that?
So yeah, I think we've got another slide come up
Mhm.
where it kind of dives into it more, but that is something that yeah, we make very
Yeah.
it's already written in there, but I always say to clients because in terms of making these surveys, you can customize the initial
Mm,
message that someone sees. So I tell them, look, you don't want this to be in workable language. Put this into your
right.
own language that you're comfortable with, but these are the points that you need to hit. It's anonymous. It will not impact their application. Otherwise, it is an optional thing to do. We don't force candidates to do it.
Mm,
So if you're not going to give them that sort of information they need to feel comfortable to do it, they're just not going to do it, and they don't
yeah,
have to.
100%. Our data shows that as
Yeah.
well. You know what we were seeing earlier. We had a quick question through in the situation where the role is in the UK, but we've had someone apply outside of the UK. Do we still need to be aware of the questions being asked? Your view on that?
For us personally, no, because when they apply, we go off of the location of the role, and based on the location of the role, we will then have, you'll have your privacy policy, your
Yeah,
notice policy, and that kind of thing. So if they're applying to the UK, you can ask UK questions. It doesn't matter where they're actually situated.
gotcha, gotcha. Um, cool. Ah, another one. Can you set up the surveys to run later in the process, e.g., at first interview stage?
David sounds like one of my clients.
I know.
So that's a really good question. We can't at the moment, but next year I believe we're going to be rolling out so that that can be done. Because these candidate surveys at the moment, because they're done right at the beginning, they are focused on DEI data. However, going forward, when we can do them at different stages, we can then roll it out to things like candidate
Yeah,
experience, candidate satisfaction, that kind of thing. So for now, the answer is no, but that is definitely on our roadmap.
yeah. Oh, the roadmap.
Your
The roadmap.
roadmap's my
I
favorite
know.
word.
Yeah. Okay, we've got 11 minutes left. So I'll zoom through the last few. Um, leadership, we know the power that leadership can have, if it's lead from the front, set the example, be the role model, all that kind of stuff. Um, senior leaders actively advocating, but being engaged as well. There are some instances where firms are required to actually report on the makeup of their senior leadership teams or their boards to regulators, etc., etc. So, actually going above and beyond that and reporting on different aspects of diversity, not just the ones that the regulator forces you to. If you can get your senior leadership teams to do that, then you can cascade that down throughout the business, fairly, in our experience, fairly easily. Obviously, then you have to tackle the systems and all those other things. But yes, we found in our survey that 1 in 4 LGBTQ plus talent disagreed or strongly disagreed that leaders in financial services were good allies to the community. So, some of that talent that we're speaking to is not necessarily seeing that. Alex, but how can I encourage that visibility from 3 layers below senior management? Yeah, tough one. Tough one. Yeah, you I think there is something to be said around, like, what mechanisms do you have to provide that feedback up you have to work within the structure you have. Ideally, we're talking about those senior leaders being those ambassadors and, cascading that approach down. But if you are sat in that sticky middle, or, above the middle, and, you have to kind of go through the channels, I think, that are available, talk to the networks, submit feedback formally, do that to HR, tell your line manager, get involved in data programs, or talk internally, I suppose, is all you can do. I think, don't underestimate the power that networks have in this conversation, or events. Share content internally on platforms that you have internally around this, or this session, for example, or the work that Workable are doing, etc. I think it's around you taking ownership of being, that engaging in factor and storytelling. We've had a comment through, storytelling is super important. So yeah, if you can tell a story at a team level, maybe you can actually set the example and convert that story into being kind of organizational. Maybe a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but it's a challenge, right? I think you have to win the buy-in first through whatever means you can, play the political game, get the access that you can, and then hopefully it will then recascade down. It's the bottom up, top down, classic point. Okay, 3 more points. Systems. We've talked about systems a little bit. Abby, from a systems perspective, we highlighted this earlier, I think, around the candidate engagement, and then there's a new piece, right, around the module. Do you want to just talk through that for the folks?
Yeah, so obviously we've gone through the kind of surveys that will be part of the initial part where an applicant is just an applicant. On the right-hand side, what you're now seeing is our new onboarding and employee management module. So that basically allows companies to say, we've now hired you, you're now an employee. We're now going to push you into our employee system where we will manage your data. So again, how I was mentioning at the beginning, we're asking the question of what's your gender, what's your age, what's your sexuality. Now you can continue to follow that through, because we can basically create different fields that will then make up a employee's profile. So the way it was very anonymous at the beginning, now the hope is anyway that there should be a bit more comfort, because you're only going to be at this point if you have actually been hired. But again, it's just encouraging people to say, we were interested at the beginning, just when you're an applicant, but we're still interested now that you're an employee. And here is a space where you can put that information into. But you'll see again underneath everything, it's optional. We don't force you at any point to sort of part with the information if you don't want to. But if you did want to try and sort of push it, then those fields can be changed so that they're mandatory and there's something you gather as soon as somebody is being onboarded. But it just gives you the flexibility to kind of do what it is that you feel is right for your organization and for the people that you're kind of hiring into your organization.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think it's interesting, around the wording that you've used there, and then that there is then hopefully then it follows through into the data is actually then there, because you can't, this is where it's the conversation around thresholds, and I should have probably said the word baseline as well. You need to have a certain amount of data before you can start.
So I think, I don't think that's one we have a picture of here, but with regard to our reporting that comes from the candidate survey, so obviously first and foremost, they're anonymous anyway. However, we are able to filter our reports on things like a specific job, a specific department, location, time frame. But if you try and use one of those filters and there isn't at least 10 responses, it will
Mm,
show you, it won't show you any data. So I think somebody mentioned a little bit earlier about they answered a question and then it became very evident that they're the one that
mm,
answered that response. This hopefully takes away from it. Obviously, I'm coming from a standpoint of companies that, get thousands of applications, have thousands of employees. But even on a smaller scale, if it doesn't at least hit that 10 threshold, we won't show you any of the
mm.
data because essentially that's the problem you then get.
Absolutely. Conscious of time, but I'll just address a couple of points. Just had someone come through just around that engagement point, Alex, I think to your point around, if you talk about the business case, why it's important, and essentially what's in it for them, that's the language that senior management always like, right? Then, that can be a thing. So, some of the data that we've shown around like engagement and challenges, and we know around retention, and there's a lot of work being done around tracking inclusion and how people feel, right? So there are resources that can be shared, and partners like LGBT Great and Workable who can, I suppose, help you um, sell that narrative internally around the business case for these types of programs. Um, but yeah, I appreciate it's hard, and we're all struggling to do this internally. We're all struggling to support clients to do this as well. No one's cracked it, but we, that marginal gain piece, we move forward every time. There was a final poll around data, but I'm going to zoom through that. So because I want to get to the final 2 points. We talked about reporting, um, tracking those rates, Abby, actually showing that to your clients so that at their threshold, allowing them to report, is important. A recent report from our leadership found that only 14% of Fortune 500 companies and 10% of the FTSE 100 shared the size of their LGBTQ plus workforce. So, even the largest companies are not all doing it and have not all cracked it from an LGBTQ plus lens. So I think that translates more broadly as well. And the final piece, I really like this as something I hadn't really thought about. When you think about that local implementation at different regions and different geographies, use local language. Actually convey these ideas and these messages in the local language. Get your ambassadors to do it on your behalf. Abby, I think your surveys are in different languages as well, right? If they need
Yeah,
to be.
well, yeah, we allow you to create them how you want to. So
Yeah.
the way we kind of put in that United Kingdom, you can just write the questions you want in English, but if it was in France, you could do it in French. So yeah,
Mhm.
you've got the ability to do it in different languages if you'd like to.
Yeah. And I think that culture piece, different people talk about different identity in different way in different languages. So I think
Yeah.
remaining sensitive to how languages express, and people who speak different languages express that identity, and reflecting that in some of the options that are available, I think could be a way to tackle some of that hesitancy, and you know
Yeah.
from people who are English as a second language, or in environments where English isn't even the dominant language. We're all very privileged to think that English is everywhere,
Yeah.
but it's really not the case.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I think those are a kind of a few thoughts from our side, just in summary, there on the screen, around what you could do as an organization to attempt to improve some of that, the sharing of personal information and those disclosure rates, depending on what language you want to use. Um, that was it really. So today we've you've shared a few of your thoughts. Thank you everyone for sharing. It's clear that this is something that remains on people's minds, and there's a lot riding on this. People are this is about people at the end of the day, right? But there is things that Workable are doing to support in the talent lifecycle, stuff we're doing at LGBT Great to try and enhance and support clients to capture this around LGBTQ plus people. But it's a tough one. Lastly, Claire, just over to you. Claire's our COO and the head of LGBT Great Careers, for some final thoughts, if that's okay.
Lovely. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Alex. Thank you, Abby. Really good insights today. So thank you to everyone else as well in participating in the polls. Really interesting to see. We're probably talking to the converted in the main, but it's still lovely to hear everyone's sentiments. So thank you for sharing your thoughts, and really nice to see all the chat function keeping busy and some questions answered. So great work for a Wednesday rainy afternoon. I think, I'm sure you found the session interesting. Alex, quick one. I'm guessing you will share. There's been a couple of questions questions about sharing slides. Are you okay to share those post the meeting?
Yep, happy to share the slides.
Fabulous, thank you. So we'll get those circulated with follow-ups. And really just to thank you as well, we've got some of our LGBT Great Careers partners on the call that have already supported LGBT Great Careers launch back in September, and already posted lots of jobs on our website. So we're actually launching our charity partners, which Alex talked at the turn of the call in November, and that means that we can advertise any of our charities on the platform for free. So if you do have any recommendations, whether that's social impact organisations, whether that's humanitarian organisations, please do share those organisations, because we do want to give them a platform to have a voice. We know that recruitment can be expensive, so if there's something that we can give back, please do recommend those organisations. And for those that have been on the call today, we do want to offer, as part of a webinar introductory offer, I suppose, you know, to have a sample of what LGBT Great Careers can offer. And we are offering free postings to anyone that's attended the call that hasn't already utilised those web postings as part of their LGBT Great membership. So if you can get in contact with us, please do. Lauren's going to share, and she's just done this in the chat function, the info@lgbtgreatcareers.com email address, and then we can give you further details on there. But overall, really good session. So thank you, Abby. Thank you, Alex, for having a really good session. Really important that we continue the good work, and that's it from me.
Great. No, thanks everyone. Thanks, Abby, for your time, and looking forward to catching up with everyone on LGBT Great Careers and seeing those jobs coming through in the near future. Great. Thanks everyone.
Take care, guys.
See you later. Bye.
Take care.